Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 170. And this episode probably will end when it says it's going to end, but can you ever really trust that these days in these uncertain times? And do we need to start it again to make sure that we've heard everything and heard the whole story? Because we're talking about endings in video games.
Yeah, a conversation that came up pretty naturally on the Discord server. You should join the Discord server. The link is in the show notes down below. You too can then contribute to this very show. But a pretty natural conversation about endings came up. Our very own human Metroid extraordinaire and Pokemon savant, one Alex Lavelle, queued up this suggestion of like talking about games that end but don't really end and then really end. The idea of like endings and how before the post-credit scene of the movie era and beyond, we had endings and movies just ended. And now we're never quite sure if a movie's going to end until it really ends and the lights come up. And video games have kind of always done a similar thing. I think back to some of the earliest NES games having like bonus endings if you complete a thing. And this idea of when are you really done with a game? And I think beyond just talking about endings, like, have you reached a game's ending when you're done with it? Have you reached it when you get to the credits? How have you finished it when you found all the secret things and then really got the ending? Or are all of those valid endings? And like this conversation of where games really end and why these different kinds of endings maybe exist, and if we have a preference, if one's better than the other, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, if you've listened to any other episodes of this show, you know that our answer is those are all valid. But let's delve into it a little further. Certainly due to like older NES games having like a now played on the harder difficulty, or you've now unlocked the harder difficulty, beat it, definitely links it towards the arcade roots of video games, of put in another quarter, rack 'em up again, kid. Actually, I'm really glad you mentioned films in this, Matt, because, yeah, we know the approximate length of a film. You can even look up a runtime if you're looking up a movie before going to see it. Or if you're watching it on a streaming service, watching it on a computer, you can kind of move the cursor a little bit and see what the runtime is. It's not going to suddenly unlock another 45 minutes after you've watched the credits or something. When you read a book, you can see how thick it is. And you can only put so many advertisements or weird things in the back before you know, like, this isn't the real ending. But a game is much more fluid if we're even just talking about the narrative ending, let alone when we are done with it.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some tools for that. We often talk about howlongtobeat.com, which Jeff and I are both avid users of, and I track my backlog on. But like that gives you their estimate of each, like how long to hit credits, how long to beat it and all the side quests, and then how long to completely complete it and get all the trophies. And most of the time it's pretty accurate, but we all play at different paces, you know, especially if you die more than others, say, in a Souls game, might extend the playtime a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
But I think we should take a step back also. So this conversation was born out of the recently released Animal Well, a game that Jeff was very excited for and I was very skeptical of, and now I have finished to my ability and also have seen the light as far as how amazing the game is.
I'm just slowly playing my way through it and having the best time.
And it's one of those games that recently in the oeuvre of games has brought up, like, are you done when you hit credits? Because Animal Well is one of those games that the minute you hit credits and you see the end of the story, quote unquote, even though it's not a very heavily narrative game, that's when, like, the rest of the world that you're within Animal Well opens up. Certain collectibles you couldn't get, certain abilities you couldn't get, certain things you couldn't see until you beat the game. And so some argue that you haven't really beaten the game because there's all of these things that you can't access till after credits. But you hit credits, it says thank you for playing, so in theory, isn't it also valid that you are done at that point? I, for one, stopped playing Animal Well after I hit credits. I do have it installed still on the PS5, and I do intend to go back to it to like hunt around for stuff because it's fun to explore that world. But I felt done once I hit credits. And my criteria for the thread that I keep on Twitter of when I've beaten the game is when I hit credits. It's why a few years ago when Street Fighter 6 came out, I posted several times that I beat the game because when I beat arcade mode with a certain character and saw credits, I posted about it. I think there's a versatility to it, but it is definitely born of this thing of like, are you really done if there's more of the game to play?
That is honestly the big question. I mean, Matt, do you normally, when playing through games, for your thread, you are posting these when you hit credits? Do you feel typically when you are playing a game, you're done with it when you hit credits, or that you finished it? Whether finish it or finish the story, is that a difference for you?
So, yes, I post when I hit credits. It's why, if you watched me play Signalis last year, 2 years ago. Time's a lake. I can't keep track.
Yep.
I posted that when I hit credits that I finished it, and Dave and several others went, "Did you though?
Did you though?"
Maybe you should go back.
Right. And I mean, Nier Automata is a big one of those for me where
I hit credits in the first hour of that game by accident.
Right. Well, that's one where, yes, it has 26 endings technically, and they all have a letter attached to them as, it's highlighted somewhere in the name of the ending in a very artsy way that just, I love. But the first 5 endings, light spoilers, comprise the full main playthrough of the game. And there is repetition in getting those endings. There is new stories also and completely new experiences that you don't get once you hit ending. If you hit them in order, A, B, C, D, E, hitting ending A, you're going to get new play experiences after that and same ones. But that is absolutely one where it's like, yeah, I beat it. I got credits. I got the ending. But did you really beat it? This is where that question comes in, and it becomes a matter of when is the story done? An ending is when we stop telling the story. There's a lot of different places you can read about that or hear about that or talk about that. The first spot I always think of when I think of that is one of the early Sandman storylines, one that's actually covered in the Netflix series, the waitress who fancies herself a writer, and it's all about creating the endings and thinking about that and, the Fight Club thing. On a long enough timeline, mortality rate reaches 100%. It's all about when we stop telling the story, and we are the ones playing the game. We get to decide when we stop telling the story, but also the credits kind of decide that. It's an interesting sort of participatory thing, I guess.
Yeah. And to go back to your question, it's case by case. And actually, it's funny, this is going to fold into our Patreon episode that we're doing this month too. So here's a little preview. So I'm part of the retro review crew over on Retro Hangovers Discord. And it's run by an awesome fella named Ozzy. And what it is every month the community votes on a game and then they all play it together. And then they write these little reviews. And then Ozzy makes like a nice little graphic of like the average of the review score based on all the people who participated and a quote from one of the people who reviewed it.
Yeah.
And when I first joined it, I didn't do it for a while because I just didn't have the time. And then I started doing it. But I found out recently with this month's game, as of May, when we're recording this, there's not an expectation to finish these games. That would be ludicrous, especially since some of them are pretty long.
Yeah.
The expectation is that you gave the game its best shot. And if you abandon it, then you write a review reflecting that. And the May game was Secret of Evermore, which I'd never played, but I'd always heard about.
Yeah.
And so I jumped into it, played it for about 3 hours, made no more than probably 30 minutes worth of progress in 3 hours, and gave up and wrote my review.
Sounds about right. Yeah, it's Secret of Evermore. It's one of the old SNES titles.
And it wasn't fun. And so for me, I accepted that as an ending. And it was very weird to me because I try and complete everything, even the games that I'm not fond of, so I can have a complete view of it. In a similar fashion, I'm a part of a backlog, not necessarily contest, but we have a spreadsheet that we're all keeping each other honest on over on Dave Jackson's channel. And I made a backlog of 25 games because I'm an idiot. And I've covered about 30% of them, so I think I'm doing okay. But one of the games that were on my backlog from last year was RoboCop, which I'd got as a gift towards the end of the last year and started playing it and really enjoying it. It's like, what if Fallout, but pared down and in the RoboCop universe? But I got about, 15 hours in, and I was like, I don't want to play this anymore. It gave me what I wanted from it, but I'm kind of done. And so I wrapped it up, and I was talking to Dave, and Dave's like, that you're finished. You finished the game. You didn't finish it by the way they wanted you to finish it, but you're done with it. So you can mark it as complete on this system that we have because you're done with it. You're not going to go back to it. And if you do, that's fine, but for these purposes. And so I think it's a case by case for me. Typically, if I'm playing a game for our podcast or for SideQuest or to cover in some way and discuss, I try and play it to the end. I try and finish it, which means seeing credits.
That makes sense.
And for some examples, this year, we've both talked about and played some really big games. And like the biggest are RPGs like Dragon's Dogma 2 and Final Fantasy Rebirth and Infinite Wealth. And all of those games, I did not do all the side stuff. Now, in Infinite Wealth, I did quite a few of it before I hit credits. And in Rebirth, I had also done quite a bit of it before I burned down on it and hit credits. Dragon's Dogma, I did everything I could get done because I was obsessed with that game.
Right.
And it's the only game this year so far I've thought about starting a new game on. And so I think it really just depends on how much I'm invested in the game. But like Animal Well, a game that I had no interest in until I found out I could get it for free on PlayStation. Free. It's that magic money you pay every month, so it's technically free. And I downloaded it and fell in love with it immediately. And so I felt the pull to play the moment-to-moment stuff. But then when I hit credits, I was like, well, I saw what I needed to see. I'm done. This was great. And so I think it really does depend on the game. Again, a classic example I brought up many years ago at this point, Batman Arkham City, I played like 3 times back to back and completed it the first time, like toe to tip, Riddler trophies, everything. And I felt done after doing that, but then still kept playing. Whereas now, if I replayed any of those games, as soon as I hit the end credits, I'm like, I'm done. Move on to the next thing. I don't have time.
Well, something like Arkham City, yeah, it was a game and an experience and a story that you enjoyed. And a well-written narrative or an enjoyable one or anything with the twists and the turns, it's a surprise the first time, but it leads to an enriched experience when you revisit it. You can see certain twists coming, or you might try to change something to see if it can go a little differently, especially nowadays with branching storylines. Sometimes you can't, and sometimes you can. Games that require multiple playthroughs so that you can reach either a true ending, a golden ending, see everything, they're just baking that idea into the gameplay loop. The arcade-style games, whether modern ones or from back in the day, back in the NES days and earlier, they needed it to be a thing of you want to do it again, you want to assail it again, you want to play it again, however complete or incomplete it is. So, short games you can beat once and be, I'm good, that's all I needed. And long games you can play over and over again because of that sort of thing. And yeah, that does become a question of, are you done with it? Now, a funny thing that you did bring up, Matt, is the notion of I didn't finish the game, but I am done with it. Because, yeah, no, absolutely. I feel the same pull that you do, especially of playing as much of the game as possible, of experiencing as much of it as possible in our capacity as video game journalists, as people talking about games, because I like being able to understand even the parts that I don't like, where I go, I didn't like this mini game, but it's a big part of it. And this person I'm talking to, you love that shit. So you're going to have a good time with this. You may not like this. And I like being able to speak about that. But for our own personal journey, whenever you're done, you're done. I would like to cite a very easy source for both of us, Chrono Trigger.
Yes.
Chrono Trigger is a game that's got, 16 endings at this point if we go by the remake, by the DS one?
I think so, yeah. That sounds right.
Now, that is very much an example of the ending is when you stop telling the story. For most of those endings, stopping the story is beating the final boss. And it is the same final boss across the board. It's not we beat this guy, but we weren't wearing the special green hat, and now we get a false ending. It is beat Lavos. And whenever you did, and whatever time looks like, that is what the ending is, which is a wonderful example of all of this. But the reason I'm bringing it up right now is one of those endings where it isn't about beating Lavos is the game over.
Yeah.
If you lose to Lavos, you get an ending that is basically, and yet the future refused to change. And we tried our best, but we still failed. And that idea that game over can both mean you've run out of credits, you've run out of lives, and you haven't finished all of our content, or you finished everything. It is still game over regardless. And thus, in that highfalutin way, still an ending.
Yeah. I mean, game over endings are not that uncommon, but I do want to turn the question back to you, Jeff, although I feel like our listeners have a much better idea. So I'm going to alter it. Jeff, when you play a game by yourself, because we know when you play with your better half, you do everything.
Oh, yes.
Your Length with Infinite Wealth alone is a testament to that.
We're still playing it.
I know, and I really am excited for that hour count once it comes out. But that said, when you're playing a game on your own, do you feel the pull to do everything, or do you also stop at credits? Do you see a game like Animal Well, because you've played a chunk of it now, being something that you will go back to after you hit credits because you want to explore more? Like, I'm curious. We're both big Metroidvania fans as well, which also leans into this. But I'm curious because I don't actually know. Do you often stop at credits, or do you beat a game within an inch of its life to fully feel that you've conquered the thing?
I don't typically beat it within an inch of its life. There are a handful of games where that is the case, because if I have that pull, I'm going hard. And I will go beyond what the game says is 100%, because I want to dissect it, and I want to take each little piece, and I want to spin it around under a microscope and understand it, and there's not enough hours in the world to do that with all sorts of games. So I have a few that I do that. There are plenty of games where I will do a good grind about getting everything. I have a sort of barometer of, and that's enough. Most of the time, that is past credits, especially if the thing that I'm doing that gets me to credits is enjoying the game. Yeah, there's a ton of games where I'm like, I'm having a good time, but it's more about seeing the story through. Metroidvanias, I will often try to fill out the map. And Animal Well, I will almost definitely play past credits because something I'm really enjoying in it is that it's a game with so much mystery to it, and that is so rare for me. You mentioned I often game with Sarah, and Sarah likes knowing what to do. And so I kind of get to play mission control. I'm the guy in the chair saying, go this way, do that. Do you want to figure that out for yourself? I have the answer ready. I play guidebook. And so games that let me explore. If I don't know how a system works within a game, I'm going to look up how it works so that I know that I'm doing it right. And then from there, I'm going to apply it. And I like exploring until I'm done exploring. And if that is only till credits, fine. But usually it's past. There are always a few corners that I'm like, you're just putting that there to say that you did it. That's not for me. If we're going by how long to beat standards, I'm very much a main plus extra. Like that is where 80% plus of my gaming instincts take me when I play.
This discussion was really born out of, like I said, Animal Well, and more specifically, the kind of meta-narrative, multi-narrative kind of endings famously shown in like games like Dragon's Dogma 2, which I mentioned, Tunic, Animal Well, Sea of Stars. These games that have an ending, but then also the game kind of expects you to replay it because there's stuff that you can do that you couldn't do, or expects you to like not consider the first ending you get as the true ending because there's more to discover. Sometimes these kinds of endings are met with hostility. I know tons of folks who like, when I beat a game, I beat the game. And if it's not the ending that I'm supposed to have when I beat it, that's the game's fault, not mine, which is a totally valid opinion to have.
Absolutely. We got shit to do.
But I do kind of really love, most of my favorite games do have some level of that kind of discovery. Not all of them, but I think about Mass Effect, which has a variety of different endings and stuff that you can only encounter by really combing the game and replaying it and understanding it.
And there's no canonical ending on that one too, but a lot of them feel very final and thus can be your canonical ending.
Correct. And then there are games, you know, like I'd say Citizen Sleeper even, where like there's a multitude of endings all based on the story, but you can go back and like discover more when you know how the mechanics work and all of that. And then again, the aforementioned kind of Tunics of the world in Dragon's Dogma 2, where you really won't see the actual true ending unless you know something beforehand, or you go back and like replay it or re-explore or rediscover. Sea of Stars also. Sea of Stars, you actually cannot get the true ending without beating the game once and then going back into that same file. I like that kind of stuff. I don't know. There's something about that sense of discovery. Like I am still, and I blame Jill Grote for this a little bit, Tunic's biggest advocate, but I am still hesitant to spoil anything mechanical or narrative related to that game only because like there are mechanics that you discover in that game that you could do from the minute you start the game, but because you don't know you can do it and it's not a simple single button press, you won't discover it until the game helps you find it later. And things like that I think are really magical. And in that same way, the ending of that game, completing the manual as it were,
right,
and understanding why it's important to how that game ends is still one of my favorite endings in that game and makes me want to go back to play it again.
It's interesting. I would almost consider it a narrative Metroidvania in that the abilities you unlock were always there. You just needed to unlock your personal ability or a Metavania, as it were.
Yeah, and even though I haven't played it, I've heard that Outer Wilds is very similarly. You were given everything from the start of that game, a game famously based on a time loop, but you are not shown how to do those things within the loops until you just discover them naturally. And if you had known them in the first 5 minutes, you could beat the game pretty quickly, but it's that discovery over time. And I think there's nothing wrong with those kinds of endings. I can understand why people bounce off them, but I feel like they're often done in these indie titles and shorter games that like, you know, if it's an extra 2 hours on top of the 8 hours you invested, I feel like that's reasonable. Whereas like a game like Dragon's Dogma 2, which is many more hours, you know, the true ending could set you back quite a number of hours to figure it out. And like, while I don't think they're inherently a wrong or right way to do an ending, I do love those kinds of things. Look, it's no secret that Jeff and I love when things get a little meta. And the fact that these games that we've mentioned do that and do it well, I think is really interesting. And as Alex posed in his question in the Discord, it seems like they're more common. Do you think that's like just an industry trend? Do you think it's because more people who grew up playing games are making games with more tools? Because I think it's somewhere in between those two things.
I agree. And I think, again, it happens more in the indie space because, well, a lot more interesting ideas happen in the indie space by just design and consequence. But also, yeah, that notion of a puzzle box, of what you can peel and pull, because the ending you get when you play through a game once, whether or not it's the true ending or not, is how you got to the ending by playing the game. I think a lot of this is about playing on learned behaviors and expectations of gaming. And those are some of my favorites. Those games that you do the thing that you always do in a game. You're in an RPG and you go into everybody's houses and loot their stuff. Well, you're a jerk. To go to Chrono Trigger again, the trial you get after going to the Millennial Fair is a wonderful but isolated wake-up call of sometimes your actions have consequences. But a game like Undertale, where your ability to reset and go back to an earlier file or choosing to do so is remembered by only certain characters within the game because there is narrative reasoning for that. It's not a game about time loops, but you are creating a time loop by doing the things you do, by, resetting the Danger Room computer in X-Men for Sega Genesis kind of thing. And so I think it is more of a folks who've played games, making games, and exploring the unique quality of storytelling that gaming gives us. I'm a big fan of the film Clue. And yes. It's a fantastic movie. It's a wonderful romp.
Classic.
Listeners, if you haven't watched Clue, check it out. If you've seen Clue, watch it again. Hasn't it been a little while? Would anyone care for fruit or dessert? It's a film that has multiple endings. The way that it's typically presented in the way that I think a lot of folks our age, in probably watching it on VHS or then on DVD, it just sort of is all of the endings in order. Which is fine. On the DVD, you can kind of shuffle it. And when they first screened it, they sent them out with different endings. And they have one that they go, definitely the most bonkers one, where they go, here's what really happened. But you know what? For some people, Silent Hill 2 does end on the dog ending, okay? For some people, that is just the ending. I think it's a matter of folks who love games playing with the form and playing with their expectations. And I, for one, love that.
Me too. So I have no issue with a game that just ends, right? We play lots of games that just end.
Yeah, it's not that it's a bad thing. It's just, there we are.
Right. To opposite end, a game like Botany Manor, which we got to interview the lead creative on and got to experience ourselves, and we're very grateful for. Like, that game mostly just ends. Like, you've solved the last puzzle, you get a little narrative hook, and then it's done. And, like, that is a game where the narrative is as important as you make it, because it's mostly in notes and other things. And honestly, very similarly, a survival horror game would be, where a lot of the context and narrative, at least in the early days for sure, were in the notes and documents you found around a mansion per se, or a creepy police station. And this also does a very similar thing narratively, where you can get as into or as little into the main character's life as you want based on going through that. Again, that makes that the ending and the credits mean less or more depending on how invested you are in the character. And I think any game that has multiple endings, a false ending, true ending, whatever, there's going to be more friction if you're not enjoying the game. I think if you are enjoying the thing you're doing, the ending will likely be satisfying. And I think that's also a strange thing to talk about with endings, as without spoiling, I promise no spoilers, I was unsatisfied, I guess, to put it lightly, with the ending of Rebirth. But I know tons of friends of mine who are downright dislike the ending and think it kind of sours the experience of both games and makes them leery about the third game. And I think that's interesting, right? Because experiencing a game and enjoying every step of it until you get to the end, but an ending can almost retroactively hurt or improve an experience, I think, based on how much you're invested in it. And I think that's true of movies and other media as well. I think it's the journey as well as the destination in a lot of media. Rebirth, very interestingly, and specifically this year, is one of those where, like, a lot of folks enjoyed the journey with these characters and then got to that ending and it kind of soured the whole experience. And I think that's something that's hard to deviate from, is the weight of an ending, right? I think the weight of an ending is always going to have impact, meta or otherwise, on your experience retroactively, because there's something to our brains, serotonin and completion.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think games that have a little more of a straight line towards an ending, like, yes, there are different things that happen, whatever else, but a game like a Final Fantasy game, any Final Fantasy game really, has a singular ending. even games like 10-2, it's just how much of the ending do you get, in a way. And so that definitely carries a lot more narrative weight versus a game like Stanley Parable, where the point is finding endings, and the point is exploring and getting where you are, and all of the endings are true, and none of the endings are true. On a sort of hybrid of that, I want to go back to Nier Automata for a moment. Nier Automata is the sequel to Nier. Nier is, in fact, an offshoot sequel, both, to Drakengard, which was an earlier Yoko Taro game that was on the PS2 that had 3 entries, Drakengard 1, 2, and 3. Those had multiple endings as well. Nier is built off of the original Drakengard, not 2 and 3. There's, I think, 5 endings, or give or take, in the first Drakengard. And Drakengard 2 is built on ending A. The first ending, it leads into that. Cool. That makes sense. Nier, which came out well after, is built on ending E, which was an absolutely ridiculous one. And so, which of them is the canonical ending? Which of them is the truth? I mean, if we want to get Legacy of Kain on this shit, what is the truth and what is the timeline of what is correct? Well, yeah, a lot of games can do that. And I think the ones that put a little more towards the notion of a singular ending, even if it has some variance within it, yeah, that can absolutely have a big effect on things, especially as we, as consuming of media, whether games, books, movies, whatever, have a kind of like, but what did it mean? But what's the truth? What was it really? And a game lets you re-experience it, not just reread the book, not just rewatch the movie. The fun thing about post-credits content is it's almost like getting to do behind-the-scenes world building. You get to credits because you saw the narrative that the game meant. This is painting very broadly. You get to that ending, and then you get to explore more that unlocks afterwards. Well, that fills out the world. We get to the end of a story in any medium, and we have questions about the world if we enjoyed ourselves and engaged with the world it gave us. So now we get to do other little mini games to fill things out. We get to explore a new dungeon that has all of this lore. We get a couple of new cutscenes or whatever that is. I would say those are post-ending. The game has ended, but we are still engaging with it. And we are still filling it out, whatever the shape of it tends to be.
Sure. And I think also something that builds on that is acknowledging the elephant in the room, at least when it comes to me and you, that we don't play video games like normal people or like sane people, more importantly.
There's plenty of folks who play video games who play them like us, but yes, we are not your typical.
Right. I would like to generalize for just a moment that the average video game player who maybe only buys a couple games a year, they may be less likely to stop playing a game when they finish it because it's one of the 5 games they got that year that they're interested in. Folks like me and you who are, within the games journalism space, but even folks who just play games as intensely as we do, which are a lot of other podcasters and other creatives that we know.
And the people who listen to these podcasts.
Correct.
Hi there, everybody.
Tend to burn through games to play as many games as they can, right? They want to talk about their favorite game of the year. They want to try and experience all these things, feeling pressure from other people recommending stuff. I'm hearing tons of great things about 1,000 Times Resist, a game that was nowhere on my radar that now I apparently have to play this year.
Same,
and
yeah.
It's those things that it's like we're shifting stuff and pushing stuff to left and right. But when we were kids, for example, and we've talked about this a lot in our retrospective episodes, you got 5 games, maybe a year, if even, and you played those games until maybe you got a new game. And that was it. You just played these games. You didn't think about what was coming out. I think it wasn't until the N64 generation where I actively looked forward to releases and followed release dates. And so as someone who now lives in that world of wanting to track when everything's coming out, participating in game release fantasy leagues and all sorts of other stuff, trying to participate in what the calendar year is bringing us, it does warp a little bit of what an ending means to me also, because I'm not going to lie, by the time I got to Rebirth, what the ending of Rebirth, what the ending really meant to me, besides theory crafting, was I can move on to the next thing. I've been playing this game for 3 months. I liked it, but I'm done. I don't want to be playing this game anymore. And now, of course, arguably, I could just stop playing it whenever I don't want to play it, but I don't like things hanging over me feeling incomplete. To me, putting a game down doesn't feel like an ending, although it does for others. Jeff, there are people in this world who buy games and never finish them and just play the thing that they want to play because they like playing it. It's wild.
Sounds nice. Sounds calming in a way. And that sense of like, what is the ending and what is it? One of the other mediums that I want to cite here is musicals.
Okay.
Where you also have a medium of, live theater in general. I'm an actor. I love live theater. But the thing of we feel all these emotions, we see all these things, we do all this stuff. It's not just the words on the page that we're reading and we, the audience, are experiencing, or watching a film that was filmed. Maybe it took so many takes and so long to make. Theater, you're watching it happen right in front of you. And the actors that are participating in it and the crew that is running it and everyone in the audience is experiencing it together. And that has made for some truly intense experiences and meditations on agency and all kinds of cool shit. And also sometimes just some good song and dance and a damn good time. But the one musical that I think is very germane to this conversation is Hadestown, which is one of my favorite musicals that I've seen, certainly in the last few years, and one that has stuck with me for a while. Hadestown is the story of Orpheus and Eurydice and the idea of going down to the underworld to retrieve your love, and you can't look back and look upon her until you're out of the underworld. And there's so many interpretations of what it means and what is it a meditation upon and whatever else. But the music of it is sort of early 20th century, kind of Americana, kind of jazz, a bunch of stuff, all sorts of music that I love. And so you've got a narrator character there the whole time, Hermes, who from the opening is telling you it's an old song. It's a tragedy, and we're going to sing it again. And it's got a very kind of revival feel to it, and we're all going to come in and do this. And you think nothing of it. And then you see the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. The fun thing about when a musical or a show adapts like a known myth, you know where it's going.
Yeah. You know how it ends.
You know how it ends. And that's the thing. It ends how you expect it to end. But it kills you every time. And after it happens, we reprise a lot of what is sung in the beginning. And even Eurydice is lost, and Eurydice shows up again in the ending. It's a loop. It's a cycle. It's an old song, and we're going to sing it again. Maybe because it gives us hope. Maybe because this time it'll be different. Maybe this time we can prevent a character from dying in a game. Maybe this time we can get to the villain in time, even though this isn't one of those kinds of games. But we're done with it when we're done with it. And sometimes the ending, we think we're done with it because we put it down this time, and then we come back years later. And so, yeah, there are some people that just put games down and walk away. And yeah, no, that sounds very calming, and I'm sure they get a lot more done than us, but endings are where we make them.
Yeah, for sure. I'm inclined to think for myself, like, endings have more impact now that I have more of a sense of completion as an adult than I did as a kid. I feel like we played lots of games we never finished as kids because you were kind of just figuring things out.
Yeah, we're ostensibly good at games now.
I would use the term. Yeah, that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, at least for me. But it's one of those things where there are plenty of games that come out that don't even have an ending. I think about, we've talked about live service games and competitive shooters and online games.
So the ending is when you're done with them.
Right. And I think that can be just as impactful. But, when talking about like the meta narrative of a game and how it really ends, I think you bringing up Chrono Trigger earlier is a really interesting one, because I think, as far as I'm concerned, at least, it's one of the earliest meta narratives I can think of. And I feel like we've talked about this on the show before. We may have even talked about it in our SideQuest episode with Chrono Katie, but for sure I know you and I have talked about this. The entity that's always referred to in that game in multiple endings. The entity is at rest. The entity feels satisfied. It is more or less talking about the player. The player is this entity that's controlling this universe.
Yes.
And I think that's really interesting because, in a time when I was younger, where I wasn't really thinking about meta-narratives or games referencing me as the player, it really made me feel something. And I think that's why these meta-narratives are so impactful, is when they acknowledge the player and the player gets to be a part of it. I mean, Tunic is a big part of that too, right? Like this agency that the player's given, and the guidebook that you're collecting pages for is not for the fox. The fox can't read that book. You're reading the book, and it's changing how you play that character.
Exactly.
I think those kinds of narratives are really important because it acknowledges the player as an active participant of the story. Not that games that don't are less than, but I think there's something really special, especially in modern games, that doing that kind of represents, that acknowledges the player, acknowledges your influence, acknowledges your participation in the story.
It's really nice when it's pulled off, and it's pulled off well. There's plenty of heavy-handed ways of telling that story, or like You should have turned the game off. You're doing horrible things. Why are you doing this? Everyone trying to be Spec Ops The Line or something. But when it does acknowledge you and makes you a part of it, yeah, it's incredible. It's beautiful. Now, Matt, do you have any sort of endings that you really love that you almost go, that can't possibly be the canon ending, but I like it, or I like getting that one, either because it's a little wacky or whatever it is? Like, what's your favorite, like, non-standard end in a game that you can think of?
I mean, there are a few favorites of mine that I've not gotten myself because I can't bring myself to do it. Undertale was always a game going into that I knew I was going to beat twice because I knew I couldn't get the pacifist run the first time. I had watched a review or whatever that talked about it. I was completely spoiled on that game before I played it. And spoiler alert, it did not impact my enjoyment of the game. I still loved it. But there is a genocide ending also famously where you kill every monster in the game, the Chara ending as it's referred to, and that is an ending I will never do, but I think is still one of the most chilling endings because it really does play into the meta narrative and the player involvement. I've talked about this before, but if you don't want any spoilers for Undertale, I'm going to spoil the first 10 minutes of Undertale. When you first start Undertale and you're found as the little child, you're brought in by, it's Uriel, right? Is the
Toriel.
Toriel, thank you.
Like Toriel.
Fuck. Anyway, you want to leave the house that she's brought you into, and she stops you from leaving, and you can fight her. And on my first playthrough, I killed her, and it let me kill her, and I freaked out, and I reset the game, started over. And when Flowey showed up at the very beginning of the game again, he's like, by the way, don't think I don't know what you did. She also kind of knows also, but she doesn't know that she knows, or something like that. And it just freaked me the hell out and made me love the game even more. And it's like, I think that those kinds of chilling meta narratives that make you rethink and theorize are always really interesting. I'm curious where Deltarune's going to go because we've only seen 2 parts of it so far.
Oh, yeah.
And the 2 parts have been pretty chilling in their resolution for those chapters, making a broader scope of what the smaller scope of Undertale was, though Undertale was still pretty crazy. So, I mean, those variants of endings in Undertale are, I think, pretty common. And the Chara ending, as far as I know, is not the canon ending, but there's not been a sequel to Undertale, though technically you could argue Deltarune might be, but that's a whole other can of worms. But, there's no canon endings because there's nothing following it yet. So any of the endings in Undertale can be considered canon. And in the same way, with Mass Effect, I am always fascinated by all 3 endings of the trilogy. I think that there's no right answer, and there shouldn't be. The scariest thing about from moving on from Andromeda to whatever this new Mass Effect will be is that Andromeda skips over it because it's in a different galaxy altogether. But this new game is rumored to merge these 2 other games, the trilogy and Andromeda. And if they canonize one of those endings, I'm going to throw my computer out the window because that's the whole thing, is that the game really prides itself on that. None of them are canon. They're all possible. So that was a roundabout way of saying I think the most memorable non-canon canon endings for me are Undertale, but also I think Mass Effect, since technically all of them and none of them are canon because there has been no direct follow-up to those games yet.
Well, and I think both of those put a lot of value on the player's choice, where I don't know if they'll ever canonize any of the Undertale endings because the point of it is how you go about doing it. If you do the Char ending, the genocide ending, you can't start the game up again. You have to do a full clean system reinstall on that game because it remembers what you did and there's nobody left. And I would argue because of the nature of the story, doing the best ending is how you never play the game again, because why would you disturb them? Mass Effect, yeah, it's another one where you're Shepard, so they're your choices, not anyone else's. And so those involve you far more. So in games that really value your agency, it's a betrayal to take it away from you in a future installment. For me, some of my favorite non-standards are also ones I would never do. One that I really like is, I'm not going to go too far into it. It's from Persona 4 Golden, and it's called the Accomplice ending. It's where you help out the killer.
Huh.
I'll leave it at that. It's not gory, it's not violent, but it is chilling. And it's one that I, too, will never do. Also because I have, at that point, put in dozens of hours into the game. But, Persona, you can reload the file and keep going. It's a deviation. I think one that I really like, one of my favorite endings from the Stanley Parable that I always come back to and always is a fun example of things, and I may have talked about this before, is the museum ending. Stanley Parable is very much about the relationship between Stanley and the narrator. And the narrator is the only one that's talking the entire time, never shuts up. And the museum ending is one of the ones where you go enough off of the narrator's plan for you that he basically goes, oh, well, then I'll just kill Stanley. And there's a moment that stops, and another narrator comes in and discusses a little bit of this was all inevitable. This is all the nature of back and forth, and everybody needs everybody. And the narrator needs Stanley as much as Stanley needs the narrator and all of this. And then it drops you back into this inevitable moment of your death as that second narrator says it's too late for them, but it's not for you. You can stop this. Hit escape, exit the game before this reaches its inevitable conclusion. While she is begging you, she is cut off by your death. And another like chilling whatever else. And I'm like, this is my jam. I'm going to play this again and I'm going to do something stupid. Because you can just start it again. Because none of the endings are real either. And they're a lot of fun for that. And on a lighter note, I do really love the Out of This World ending from Star Fox on Super NES. When you can go and fight the slot machine in the weird alternate universe and the game never turns off until you turn it off. Yeah, I like that one.
Yeah. I mean, I think to talk about favorite endings more broadly, I mean, the variety of Chrono Trigger endings are pretty high up on the list, but I think something that makes Tunic pretty special as far as endings go is that it's not even that narratively heavy. It's mostly mechanically and accomplishment heavy.
And that is narrative.
Well, yes, and that is narrative. But to put it to rest now, no, I did not solve the golden path by myself. I'm not going to go into the details of what that is, but absolutely not did I not. I looked up a guide, and I'm proud to have done it, and it was still just as satisfying to do the thing. But there's something about that game that you think you've done everything you can do, and then you get to that moment, you're like, wait, this doesn't feel right. I feel like I missed something. And you still get credits, but then in that moment, that itch in the back of your brain, you can Google and you can find. In the same way that, like, as I was barreling towards the ending of Dragon's Dogma 2, which I will also not ruin, I had this moment in the narrative and went, this doesn't feel right. I don't think this is the ending. And so I Googled carefully to find out and remembered that actually friend of the show, Jesse Vitelli, had done a write-up where he discusses it without discussing it. And I went, oh, okay. And I looked up exactly what I needed to do to get the quote-unquote true ending, and it was worth it.
Nice.
Dragon's Dogma 2, I really want to spoil only because it does one of the most bizarre and bold things I think a video game has ever done, but I don't want to ruin it for other people. But it's just one of those things that's absolutely wild, and I can't believe they waited like 40 hours to do it.
That's commitment.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, I mean, I think those are a couple of my favorites. Do you have like an ending that stands out to you as like one of the more satisfying? I mean, another reason I love Sea of Stars, besides it was just a story about friendship, was the ending. The true ending of that, I think, is also great and makes me excited for the possibilities of the future of both Sea of Stars and The Messenger in the future, since it's the shared world.
Right, yeah.
But what about for you, Jeff?
That's an excellent question. A couple of the Final Fantasies have got some really satisfying endings for me. I do like the ending to Final Fantasy VI. That's one where it is very much based off of how many people you get back in the second half of the game. So you get to see what happens to them. It's bittersweet, but it's also a really nice going at it of, well, things got bad. Now what? And seeing the good that can come of it. I like that one a lot. Off the top of my head, I'm sure there's other ones, but that's what I'm thinking of right now. What about you?
I mean, Sea of Stars is up there. You know, a few of the others that I mentioned, like Tunic and stuff. I think one of the endings that really will always stick with me, it was back when I felt like conscious of like making choices and really understood RPG stuff, was 7, especially since 7, the original Final Fantasy 7. This is spoilers for the original Final Fantasy 7, not the remake or rebirth. There isn't really an ending. Like, you go to fight Sephiroth, the meteor hits, the life stream rises to stop it, and then it goes white. And then it jumps X amount of years into the future where you see Red 13 as an adult running with some cubs, and you see Midgar covered in vines and like, you know, overgrowth.
It's like 500 years in the future, I think.
Yeah. And so like well, the planet survived. That's good. The heroes won, I guess. But you have no idea what happened to any of the other characters. A thing that I'm most curious about with whatever the third installment is in the remake trilogy, is if they are going to spell that out for us this time, or will it even matter?
It's true.
But like, there was something about that for me as a kid where I went, oh, cool, so the world lives on. Like, I wasn't disappointed by that. I was kind of in awe that I didn't get a conclusion other than knowing that the planet survives, which is what the whole game is about.
Yeah, it's a matter of, did everyone else survive? Maybe, possibly. Some life survived and the planet continued. It was always about saving the planet.
Yeah.
You saved the planet.
Yeah, you did the thing. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately we turn it to you, listener. What is satisfying as an ending to you? I think for me, while I love living in that meta-narrative space that inspired this conversation, there is also something satisfying about getting to the end of a first-person shooter like Doom 2016, hitting the credits and slamming the controller down and being like, feeling accomplished. I finished the game. There's no bonuses. There's nothing else to find that I care about. I'm done. Or a game that goes on after the credits and there's post-credit collecting you can do. And like, I think that there's no right answer to this, but I'm curious how diverse the responses will be from our listeners, because I feel like what makes an ending satisfying is all dependent on how you interpret the art in the first place. And as we know, there are a myriad of ways to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, what do you save about the endings that you get? Are those just because you feel satisfied with the ending? Do you like keeping the save files so you can always look at them and go, it's got the little star next to it. It's got the gold trim. It does, it says everything's done. I definitely have a couple of PS1 save files that I went further than I needed to because I needed to finish it. Tekken 3 definitely stands out. I needed to unlock everything in that game because it has a little message when you look on the save file screen. Have you had moments like that? Do you have those sorts of challenges that you set for yourself? What has been the strangest ending that you found? What's been the most satisfying, the most bittersweet? What are the games that you've explored everything and yet you wish you could explore more? We want to know. Let us know. There's so many great ways to get in touch with us. We are Fun and Games Pod across all social media that we are a part of, which as of this episode is Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram, Tumblr. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode. Let us know what you thought of previous episodes, what you'd like us to talk about, what games you'd like us to talk about, who you'd like us to talk with on future episodes. You can find all of these episodes and whatever else we're working on our Patreon, patreon.com/funandgamespod. You do not have to give any money to be a member. We do have a free tier, but we do appreciate all of you that either currently or in the past have supported us. It allows us to do all kinds of great things, and we especially want to shout out those up on the high scoreboard. And today, the high scoreboard is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Needon, Roger Reichart, Alejandro Alves, Curly Bright, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Robert Prine, Sean Bowen, and Wes Bates. Thank you so much for your support. Please enter your initials. Do you have the golden ink in order to enter your initials? Because that's going to change a couple of things. Let me know before the timer runs out. Thank you so much. You can also go to certainpov.com and find not only so many other fantastic podcasts on the Certain POV network, but also a permanent invite link to our Discord server where a lot of these discussions continue. And as noted before, where the idea for this episode started from.
You can also rate and review us on your podcast platform of choice. It helps folks when they search endings in video games and want to hear folks discuss that very topic. We will jump to the top of the list. The best places to rate and review are, of course, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as they are the most ubiquitous, and we have links to them down in the show notes. But I think Podcast Addict and Good Pods and a bunch of other apps also let you rate and review individual episodes as well as the show itself. So really, any place that you listen that does rating and reviews, we highly appreciate it. And if you don't listen to it on a platform that does allow, but have access to those other platforms, we still appreciate it. Nonetheless, like I said, link down below to make it easy for your convenience.
In whatever way you listen to the show, interact with the show, support, or whatever else, thank you so much for being here. We couldn't do this without you. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I am Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Are you tired of watching your beloved characters being tortured by careless authors?
Are you sick of feeling like they could have swapped out all of the painful action and the plot would remain untouched? Subscribe to Books That Burn, the fortnightly book review podcast focusing on fictional depictions of trauma.
We assume that the characters' reactions are reasonable and focus on how badly or well they were served by their authors.
Join us for our minor character spotlights, main character discussions, and favorite non-traumatic things in the dark books we love.
Find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.